Hey, hey, it's Tuesday. You know what that means.
I'm Alex,
And I'm Amber.
and this is another episode of True Crime and Chill. So, before we get into anything, let's all give a shout out to my beautiful co-host Amber, as it is her birthday today. So yay! Thank you for putting up with my spastic ass and doing this with me. And I really hope that your birthday was/is amazing, because I know that you celebrated this past weekend by going out of town to Ocean Shores, I believe.
Yeah. We got this Airbnb, and it was one of those places where from it was like they say in Clueless, it's a full-on Monet. From far away it's okay, but up close it's a big old mess. It was kind of like that. Like there was duct tape holding things together, and it was just like it was nice and it was quiet and it was better than looking at the same four walls I look at all the time. But it was kind of disappointing at like how not great.
At least you didn't have a serial killer chasing after you this weekend. At least
I guess that's it could have been a lot worse, I suppose.
it really could have. But I'm glad you had a good time. You had I saw the pictures and stuff. You and Taylor and the pup looked happy, even though the pup had a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah, she basically didn't eat the whole time we were gone, but that's normal for her. Like when we go someplace new, takes her
She's
a
like,
few days.
Mom, I gotta work on my slim figure.
And she didn't want to leave the beach because dogs.
Tiny little corgi on a big beach.
She's actually a Shiba Inu mix. Mm-hmm.
She's tiny. Like that's me.
She's a medium-sized dog.
She's small, but she's cute. She's very lovable. She's a good cuddler.
She's a good dog.
She's a good cuddler. Like, I found that out when I came up and I stayed on your couch for a week. She's a good cuddler. Like, I liked it. I was down for it.
Yep.
Okay, so before we get into this episode, okay, and it is a very special episode because this is something that Amber and I have both kind of grown up around because we're both from the same area. I do want to make a disclaimer. Everything that is discussed in here are theories, okay? They are theories that have risen due to the death and what people have said around it. They are our own personal opinions. We are not investigators. We are not detectives. We are not law enforcement. We're nothing. Like, we are literally just people who investigate, and we say our own opinions. A lot of the evidence that we have gathered were from public sources, and thus will be available for everybody to check out on our page at truecrimeandchill.com. But for now, let's discuss the death of Kurt Cobain.
Oh, yes, let's get to it.
Okay, so before we get into anything, and this will be a lot different than how we normally do our cases, we're going to do so normally with our cases, if you listen to us, we do kind of like a script where we kind of give the facts of the case and we talk a little bit about the case, we go into detail and all this stuff. But this one, it's going to be tiny bit different. We're going to give you the facts in the beginning, and from then on, it's basically just going to be an open discussion between Amber and I about basically the theories that are surrounding this death. You'll kind of be able
and there's
to
a few. So
there's a few, and some of them people have heard of, some of them only a few people have heard of, and some of them a lot of people point to. But like, you'll basically be getting kind of like an inside discussion on how an inside peek on how Amber and I discuss our cases normally outside of our recording. So that's actually going to be kind of fun. But we are so excited to bring you this. So right now we have the facts. So 9 days before Kurt Cobain's death in his Lake Washington home, he and friend Dylan Carlson went and bought a Remington M11 shotgun that was actually registered in Dylan's name. Dylan had told Tom Grant, a PI that was hired by Courtney Love, that there was a burglary in the house a few days prior and Kurt wanted to be prepared. Now, we have seen different sources. Some say no, some say yes, but some sources do say it was registered in Dylan's name because Kurt didn't want the cops confiscating it from him, as they had already confiscated a handgun. Now, again, as Amber and I have discussed prior, we don't know if that's a true source, as it's been found multiple times, but again, you never quite know.
The one part about that is true for sure is that the gun was registered in Dylan's name.
Yes. So that is the one part that is true.
He purchased that gun on March 30th. So March 30th, 1994. So yes. That's exactly 26 years ago today.
Yeah. So, when we're recording it tomorrow when this airs.
Sorry, it'll be right. So it will be well, right. Tomorrow will be March 30th. So it'll be
Yeah.
exactly 27 years
Yep.
ago. Yeah.
I thought it was 26 years this year.
I lied. I didn't lie. I was just wrong. I had to do the math. I was like, wait, if I'm going to be 37 and I was 10 when this
You're like,
happened.
wait a minute.
So he bought the gun on my 10th birthday.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
So the second fact that we have is that Kurt then flies from Seattle to Marina del Rey in California and checks into the Exodus Rehab Center on March 31st, 1994.
Mm-hmm.
That same day, Courtney Love actually calls looking for him. She proceeds to call 13 times. Each time, like, the rehab center basically answers. She says, I'm looking for Kurt Cobain. They hang up on her. They don't let her contact him.
Right.
Like,
And
at
she
all.
tried using other aliases and stuff too. And
Oh, yeah. She tried being like, oh, well, I'm his lawyer, or I'm his friend, or I'm his mother, and stuff like that. And basically nothing.
Right.
So that same day, Nanny Jackie Ferry and Frances Bean Cobain actually come and visit Kurt in the center that day. Now, Frances was about 18 months old. So she was baby. She's young and everything. So Kurt actually got to see his daughter that day and stuff. So when he was there. April 1st, 1994, Kurt ends up booking 2 flights on Delta Airlines around 5:30 p.m. on his credit card. That's all the information that Courtney was able to get. She wasn't able to get, like, where the flights were going. She wasn't able to get who they were for. All she was able to get from the credit card company was that it was 2 flights, and this is when they were booked, and this is the airlines that they were booked through. Nobody would tell her any other information, preferably, probably because Kurt told them not to.
Well, also the credit card company doesn't know where the flight is to. They only know, like, that's just it. The only information they had was that flights were purchased.
Yeah. So around 7:30 at night, he left the rehab center and actually headed towards the airport instead of going to see his wife, who was a little over 10 miles away.
Yep.
Now, he did call Courtney that day. It went unanswered. Mm-hmm. Was it that day that he called her? Yeah. So it went unanswered, but he didn't go try to see her before he left. He didn't go try to talk to her. He tried one call, and that was it.
It's reported that he called and then left a number for the place that he was staying that day, which was Elizabeth. Now, what happened was he hopped the back wall at this rehab center. What's interesting is this rehab center was like a check-in, check-out on your own type of thing.
Even though he probably could have just walked out.
He could have just walked out the front door. But earlier that day, he had been having a discussion with somebody else who was at the rehab center, and he made a joke about how somebody else had just hopped the wall the other day to escape. And they laughed about it because they were like, but he could have just walked out the front door, right? So then later, the next day, Kurt was like, I'm going to go have a cigarette. He walked out the back door
and then hopped
the back wall and left. The same way that he had just discussed the day prior. So it was kind of an interesting concept. Yeah.
So at the airport, Kurt actually ends up boarding Delta Flight 788 to Seattle and flies back to Washington.
Mm-hmm. And there are reports of him at both airports because fans saw him.
Yes.
And the flight to Seattle, he sat next to I want to say it was somebody from Guns N' Roses.
Could you imagine, though, like, being a fan and seeing Kurt Cobain in the airport and then getting his autograph and getting maybe a picture with him or something, and, like,
if you had a camera with you, because we didn't have cell phones really then. So
but if like you were if you were in an airport or something, like, you probably have, like, a disposable camera or something, like, if you're going on a trip, but, like, getting an autograph, maybe getting a picture with him, like, something or whatever, and then
days later finding
out that he's dead. Like, could you imagine? Like,
and that was one of the things that was interesting to them, is because most of the fans that saw him at the airport reported that he seemed in good spirits. Like, he seemed happy. He seemed really laid back and relaxed, and, like, they were like,
chill. Like, he seemed ready to go home.
Right.
Yeah, he seemed ready to go home. So he boards that flight. So April 2nd, 1994, Kurt arrives back in Seattle. He takes a cab to his Lake Washington house, and he gets there probably about 1:30 in the morning. Mm-hmm. So obviously, since he left California so late. So Michael Callie DeWitt, who is also a nanny for Frances Bean, who is also an ex-boyfriend of Courtney Love, who also lives in the house, said that Kurt had visited with him and his girlfriend Jessica Hopper in Callie's bedroom around 6 in the morning, about 6:05 in the morning. Mm-hmm. So probably wasn't that, like, if Kurt had gone in there, it probably really wasn't all that awkward. It was probably just him, like, checking in with him, being like, hey, I'm home, all that jazz and everything, and going back.
Right.
However, Callie says at 7:02 that was the last time he saw Kurt because Kurt was driving away from the house in a taxi. But it also shows that same day that Callie and Courtney. Well, Courtney had called Callie about 8 times that day. Now I think you said that she had more conversations with him. However, from her phone records, it was only reported 8 times that day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the next day, April 3rd, 1994, Courtney hires Tom Grant, a PI, and says that Kurt has been missing. She does not mention that Kurt had been seen at the Lake Washington house I think it was probably 12 hours prior?
Right. She also does tell him, though, that she called and filed a missing persons report
as Kurt's mother.
His mother, because she didn't feel like they would take it seriously if it was him looking for her.
Mm-hmm. And said that he was suicidal and that she was worried about him and all this other stuff. So when the media had put out, so when the media had put out all this stuff, it was under Kurt's mom's name, not Courtney, saying that she had called it. So,
but this is a recorded conversation with Tom Grant where she says that she's the one who filed it under his mom's name.
Well, and I feel like Wendy probably came forward and was like, "No, I never filed a police report. What the hell?" So I feel like, especially like if my son committed suicide, like if my son was found dead and there was a police report out there with my name on it saying I'm the one who called it in, like I'm the one who called in his missing, like he's missing, like he's suicidal and stuff like that, I'd be like, skirt, hold the boat, pump the brakes there. No, I didn't. We need to check this out.
Well, the thing was, though, that Kurt and his mom didn't actually really get along very well.
True.
So,
but I feel like if my name was attached to a police report that I didn't file, I still would have, even if I didn't get along with that person, I would still say something like, because I wouldn't want that on me. Like,
yeah, there's some other pieces to this, but it's not relevant at this time. So anyway.
So moving on, April 5th, an electrician was actually sent by Courtney to install a floodlight for an alarm system, had found Kurt deceased due to a gunshot wound in the greenhouse above the garage at the Lake Washington house.
Right.
So
he peeked in the window, and at first he thought it was a mannequin.
Yeah, he said in the interview he said he thought it was a mannequin. He thought that it was just laying there, and then he saw the blood.
Yep. But the thing was, he saw the blood out of the ear.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when he realized, and then he called. Actually, what he did was he called his boss. And
and his boss was like, didn't his boss call a radio station?
Yeah, his boss proceeded to then call a radio station, not the cops.
Like, why would you not call the cops? Why would you, like, okay, I get it, okay, like, oh my god, my worker is that, but like, what if that hadn't been Kurt Cobain? What if that had been just like one of his random friends that had like died in his greenhouse? Then you would have like alerted these radio stations, and these radio stations would have been like,
the initial radio report said that a body has been found in Kurt Cobain's house. That's all it said. It didn't say it was Kurt Cobain. All they said was a body has been found. Stay tuned for more.
But so why would you call a radio station first instead of the police? Because that right there makes you look suspicious as hell. I understand it's about money, but that right there makes you look suspicious as hell.
Yep.
But I guess not, considering they didn't investigate it. Anyways, we're going to get there. So we're going to get there.
Yep.
So these are the facts that we know for sure. Okay, so these are the facts that we know, like everything that we've been talking about. These are the facts that are hard and true. They have been documented. They have come out. They haven't been changed. Things like the police report, we can't really say have been changed or not because there have been multiple reports, which is why we didn't put it in the hard and true facts. But looking at this case, looking at everything around it, we also know that not everything is what it seems. What have we learned by doing these cases? Not everything looks like it should.
Yeah. Right.
So what Amber and I are going to do is, like I said before, we're just going to talk about the theories. We're going to kind of discuss everything surrounding this case.
Right.
We're going to basically bring you into what happens when we talk about a case together when we're not recording. Amber, you were obviously able to remember a lot more than I was, since I was like 2 at the time that this happened. I'm actually a few months older than Frances, actually. Mm-hmm. So her and I were about the same age when all this had happened. Mm-hmm. But like my mom was alive, but obviously I can't ask her about it because she's not anymore. Love you, Mom. But I have no clue if you were like into grunge music. You said that you were 10 around that time. So I don't know. I know that you were a huge Hanson fan. I don't know how you felt about like
So that was 97 that I was a Hanson fan. Let's just pause there for a
She's like,
second.
let's just pause and put that out there right
This
now.
happened in 1994. Now,
Yes.
what I do need to say about it is there's a few things. Which, first of all, I was a fairly, I don't want to say a super sheltered child, but my parents really didn't have me listen to a lot of more modern music. I had to
Hmm.
discover that on my own, and I didn't start finding newer stuff till about 97, which is when
Yeah.
I discovered Hanson and Alanis Morissette. So I did have kind of this
Love
darker
Alanis
grunge
Morissette.
side to me. Like I liked, like even still I really like that more alternative sound. And Kurt Cobain was very much a voice for Generation X, because you have to look at, in the early 90s, there was a lot of censorship starting to
Oh god,
happen.
yeah.
Like, oh, I mean, it had been happening for a long time, but they really started to crack down on it in the 80s. And that's when, or like late 80s, early 90s. Okay. This is when you have a lot of the Satanist cults that started coming out. And so they were like, oh, Satanists, we have to crack down on all this music like Alice in Chains and Nirvana. And,
Don't
they
let the
talk about
children
death.
listen
And
to
if
the
you,
music. Oh
right,
no.
Madonna's a bad influence. All these women are going to go out and start having premarital sex. I mean,
It's kind of like the
they,
Little Nas X issue and the like
well, so there was
the
a
stuff that's
whole,
going on today. That like it's a
right.
different type of music, but it's the same type of deal.
What you have to understand though is there was recently a huge Twitter feed about how the basically they were starting to call out Generation X to try and stop millennials and Gen Zers from this cancel culture. And Gen X just laughed. They were
What?
like, oh, okay, so you want us, the kids who you tried to cancel Dungeons and Dragons and Madonna and all, you tried to stop all these things, but you want us to try and stop the millennials from canceling Dr. Seuss, which,
They tried to cancel Dungeons and Dragons. Are you serious?
yeah, I'm serious. They tried to say it was a Satan worshiping thing.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Which anybody who's played Dungeons and Dragons, this girl right here, and Alex, you played with me once, so you
Yes,
know.
and it was actually really fun. It was
Yeah,
actually really fun,
it was super fun. Um,
even though I fell asleep.
well, you were tired and you were having a rough week. So anyway, they're laughing because they're like, "What do you mean cancel culture? You guys have been trying to cancel our culture for years." And so you call that into consideration, as well as the Gulf War and all of these things. You had a very angry generation, and the music that Kurt Cobain was creating, along with his other band members in Nirvana, because Kurt was not the only lyricist
Mhm.
in the group, right? So this music that they were creating was very much created for this angrier generation as a way for them to deal
Oh
with
yeah.
what was going on. So, and they really did start this grunge movement, but it was already kind of happening. And you have to, consider there were a lot of bands that came out of Washington. At
Oh
this
my
time,
god.
you've got Soundgarden, you've got Pearl Jam, you've got Nirvana, Jimi Hendrix is from Seattle, right? Like
Yeah, like you've got a
we
lot of stuff.
right, because in Aberdeen, okay, have you been to Aberdeen before?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a it's there's
Aberdeen has nothing. Like you like okay, so Port
it's
Angeles, growing up in Port Angeles, you get to hang out in the Walmart parking lot or the Safeway parking lot or the Dream Park or like we have like different places to hang out and then you have like the whole mountains to go do shit and then you have
right.
like the lakes and all this other stuff. Aberdeen is literally like nothing.
So
Like
they
it's
are
a
a bigger
bunch of
city
it's a
now because I was just there and I was a little surprised at how much they've grown.
wait,
Um,
seriously?
yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
god. Okay, so back when we were kids and back when like Kurt was
right,
growing up,
right. I mean, he was
it
born in the
wasn't that
'60s,
great.
right? So
It wasn't
anyway,
that great.
it's this small town where there's nothing to do, and it's not even like here where you can go walk on the trails or whatever, like or go to the lake. Like you can go to Ocean Shores because it's like
Yeah.
20 minutes, right? So you can go
Yeah.
to the beach, but that's about it. Like so most people picked up instruments as a way to cope with their boredness, and if they
Yeah.
didn't pick up instruments, they picked up drugs.
Yup.
It's just the reality of it. So
And
it's
before we say anything, like we're not saying like that as like a downside thing to people who are or have been drug addicts. We are not
No.
saying that at all. Like, I have a mother who suffered from drug addiction and stuff.
Yeah.
I have friends who have suffered from drug addiction and everything. What we're saying is it's more likely in small towns with nothing to do. There's not a lot for kids to. There's not a lot of a lot for kids to do. Like,
Right.
and in Aberdeen, especially, like you said, it's probably it's grown a little bit more now. But back
Absolutely.
then, especially, like, there wasn't a lot for kids to do. So
Nope.
it was drugs or music or
Right. Well, and there was also, he the funny thing is Kurt Cobain was actually really into pop music,
mm-hmm.
which you wouldn't think about until you start listening to the riffs in the music and you start hearing the influence. The entire time they were recording Nevermind and touring, he was listening to ABBA.
Yeah.
ABBA's
Yeah. No,
Gold
trust
Album,
me. When I heard that, I was
which is
like, no.
it's fun. But it's almost like if you listen to the album of Nevermind, it reminds me if the Beatles had a love child with the Ramones.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Honestly, he really did. He implemented
Yeah.
styles. Like, I mean, technically he was considered grunge and everything. Like, he started the grunge era in
Yeah.
Seattle and stuff. But like,
Right.
he implemented all these different styles from all these different genres into his music. And I think that's one of the reasons why his music is still good to this day. Like,
Right.
I honestly feel like that's it. Is because he made it to where, like, his music would never really go out of style.
Not just him. I mean, it wasn't just him because
Yeah.
he wasn't the only songwriter, but the music that they were creating had a new sound.
Dave Grohl.
And it was, well, at first, Dave Grohl was not the initial drummer for Nirvana. He was once they signed with their bigger label, but that's a whole nother.
I love but side note, I love all the Dave Grohl jokes where everybody's like, God, the guy from Foo Fighters looks a lot like the drummer from Nirvana.
Yeah, right.
And it's hilarious.
It's Dave Grohl.
I
know. No, like when they did their initial album recording with Sub Pop for their album Bleach, which if you haven't heard it, it's very good. It's very different from their other stuff.
Yeah.
A little poppier, and I think that may be why I like it better.
I mean, I didn't really get it. So my sister listens to like bands like that, and she listens. So when I lived in Lakewood,
yep.
Because I lived in Lakewood and I lived with my sister for a little bit, she had the radio station tuned into a certain radio station in Seattle, and it played nothing but like grunge music and like old school rock and everything. So for months, that's all I listened to with her and stuff. And so I listened to a lot of Nirvana songs. Like, I knew who Kurt Cobain was. I knew who Nirvana was. I knew like what they were and like what they stood for and everything. I knew what he stood for. But I like, and like, I heard his song. You can't not live in Washington State and not hear Nirvana songs.
Well,
like, it's
there's a
physically
Nirvana
impossible.
song in Moulin Rouge.
Yeah, like it's like the music is everywhere, but it's physically impossible. Even if you've never watched Moulin Rouge, you can't not live in Washington and never hear a Nirvana song. It's not going to happen.
Right.
It's going to happen at some point.
So, but let me go back let me step backward for just a second, because I didn't really answer the question you asked me. Instead, I went into Aberdeen and stuff. When Kurt Cobain died, now again, I was 10 and I wasn't listening to Nirvana. However, there's a girl that I know who was a huge Nirvana fan. And when Kurt Cobain died, it messed with her head.
Yeah.
Like, I knew her from church and youth groups and mutual friends, and suddenly she was wearing a lot more black. And I it's weird, but actually, this is a personal theory I have. I think the death of Kurt Cobain kind of spearheaded part of that goth movement that happened a little later, at least in Washington.
Well, the death
because
of
more
him,
people started wearing black and started, getting into more of those things. And it might just be coincidental, but it feels like that kind of sort of shifted things.
Well, the death of him actually, so completely like sidetracked from that. There were 68 suicides that were connected to the death of Kurt Cobain.
Because
they thought
there's probably more, but
there's probably
documented.
More, but so far there's 68 suicides, and the only reason they know that is because every single note had lyrics from a Nirvana song in it. and they thought, okay, well, Kurt did it, so it's okay for me to do it
Or
and stuff.
they were wearing Nirvana swag, or they
Yeah,
had,
so that it when he died, it was really a big thing. Like,
yeah.
because I remember I would talk to my mom about it because she loved Nirvana. My mom loved Nirvana.
Mhm.
And she listened to it all the time. And I used to always be like, Mom, what are you listening to? She'd be like, oh, it's Nirvana. It's Kurt Cobain. And I was like, what the fuck are you
Right,
listening to? Like,
right.
but like, so that's how I got into it. And then living with my sister in Lakewood, I got into it even more. And her and I would talk about it. And at first, like, I had thought like he had passed away because, like, you know, the usual rock star passing away. He probably just
Right.
did too many drugs. And I'm not saying that as like a downer thing. I'm saying that because that's sometimes like that's what happened back then. Like,
Yep.
they passed away because of too many drugs. And she goes, no, like he committed suicide, supposedly. And I was like,
Yeah.
supposedly. And that's when I was like, hold up, supposedly. And then, so like I had like researched it a little before, but it wasn't until we'd done this show that I was like, I want to do this.
Right.
I really want to do this.
Yeah.
because it's amazing how many people think it was a suicide. It's amazing how many people think it wasn't a suicide. It's amazing how many people think everything. And then looking more into it, like you sit here and you kind of like do that slow, like blink into the camera, like you're on The Office. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you're just kind of
You
like,
very much fourth wall it the way, yeah, you
you're
like
just
Jim
kind of like
does,
looking
yeah.
at the camera.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's very much like a,
And I joined the Nirvana train about 6 years after Kurt Cobain's death. So a lot of the stuff that's out now wasn't out then.
oh yeah.
There was a guy that I had this huge crush on in high school, and I learned that he liked Nirvana, so I started learning about Nirvana, and then I fell into my own rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And then when I learned that, he committed suicide, but then there were these conspiracy theories that, he had been killed, and so then I started, the true crime in me started looking into it, and
I think that's how we all started.
yeah, but really, and I know that we talk about it. We'll get into it. I'm not gonna. I'll stop
Oh
there
yeah,
because
we're gonna get into that.
we're getting into
But
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
like I just like I think, but like I said, you can't like, and I noticed something like living over here in Tennessee. I have yet to hear a Nirvana song on the radio. Like I noticed, or any kind of grunge song on the radio over here. Like I
over
listened to a
there. Yeah,
yeah over here in Tennessee.
right.
Once every blue moon it'll come on, but definitely not as much as it would like in the east on the West Coast and stuff.
You
So
also live near Memphis, though, and that is a huge hotbed for a lot of more modern music, a lot of
well,
country
but the
music.
station that I have in my car is very much like oldies, like rock and shit.
Right,
So
right.
it's definitely not stuff that normally plays on mainstream radio right now. And
Right.
that's just because like I haven't found a radio station that is mainstream radio over here that I like. So I just keep it on this because it plays a whole bunch of stuff. But
Well, and when I was younger, I was listening to Canadian radio because we live right on the
yeah,
border here.
that's all I could get in Port. That's all you could get in Port
Yeah,
Angeles is Canadian radio. You
yeah.
can't get any of the Seattle
Canada,
stations.
Vancouver, and Victoria. You don't. It's because of the way the mountains are and everything. We can't get a signal
Yeah, you can't
from
get any of the Seattle
Seattle,
stations
but
at all.
because of the water, we can get a signal from Vancouver and Victoria. So,
We grew up on
but
Canadian radio stations and
they
mad when we couldn't
still
enter the.
occasionally play Nirvana. But then once you start listening to more, Seattle stations like, the N, well, I don't know if the N plays it as much. They're more modern stuff, but like the 99.9
Yeah,
KISW and stuff, like
classic
they'll
rock
play.
stations.
Yeah. So it just, I don't know. And again, the way I fell into Nirvana wasn't because I was listening to the radio.
It
It
was
was
because of the guy
because,
that you like.
yeah, who interestingly enough, died a couple years later. He was in a car accident and died. So,
Oh my god.
yeah, that was, I was about 2021 when that happened.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it was a really weird feeling. But anyway, but I got into Nirvana because I really liked this guy. He liked Nirvana, and so I was like, oh, I got to get into Nirvana, right? The way that you do when you're a teenage girl
Yeah.
who has a crush on some guy. Like, oh, I need to be interested in this thing because then we have a thing to talk about.
And then
And
you
then
actually like realize you kind of like the thing, and you're like,
yeah,
oh, okay.
yeah, it fit with my darker side where I used to scream Alanis Morissette at the top of my lungs, and so
Okay, but let's be real here. Even I had an Alanis Morissette phase. Like, come on. Like, I
right,
think everybody has an Alanis Morissette phase at some point in their
probably,
life. It
probably,
may not it may not be Alanis Morissette, but it's definitely the Alanis Morissette phase. So one thing that I did notice was, like, especially reading about Kurt Cobain, is he really loved his music. He really loved making the music for the fans. He really loved making the music for the people that were like him and stuff like that. And one thing I noticed was he was very not anti-establishment, but he very much didn't go with the norms, because think about some of the bands that were out in the 90s. You got Backstreet Boys, you got NSYNC, you got the pop
Those
bands.
didn't start surfacing until about 97, 98.
Look,
This was
okay.
1991.
Yeah,
So
but
we're
I
more
remember,
we're more in
we still have
the Guns N' Roses and Poison and Madonna
you got the
and
hair
Tom,
bands.
you got Bruce Springsteen, right?
Hey, Bruce Springsteen is a champ, man.
I'm not. Nope. I'm not even going there. But
But
Phil Collins,
look at the genre difference between them
right?
and what Kurt
Right.
started and everything. So it's
Right.
he was very much a look, I'm going to record what I want to record. I'm going to write what I want to write. We're going to do how we want to do it. But at the same time,
Well, and what was a big deal about the record deal that they signed when they did the album for Nirvana, excuse me, the album Nevermind, was that they had complete licensing control over their music. Most of the time, when people are signing album deals, they don't have that kind of control. So it was a really big deal that they were able to have that much control over their record. Now, there were lots of other bands coming out about the time. I mean, we've got Soundgarden, you've got Smashing Pumpkins, and then, of course, Courtney Love's band, full name Butthole Surfers. Most people just know them as Hole because it was harder to get anything with Butthole Surfers printed in 1993.
The weirdest names. I understand Smashing Pumpkins, okay.
Well, but
Soundgarden, okay.
one of Nirvana's biggest influences was a band called the Melvins, actually.
Yeah, the Melvins actually, I think, lived 3 doors down from Kurt when he lived in Aberdeen.
But and that's how he started getting into making music in the first place. But and then his band went through a few different name transformations as well. One of the ones was
something
Pen Cap Chew. Some really interesting names.
Oh my god, no, I actually have this on here in my notes. It was all these random names.
Yeah, right. And how he ended up with Nirvana had to do with him getting into Buddhism, which is
Pen Cap Chew.
Yep.
The Ted Ed Fred.
Yep.
Blitz.
Yep.
So first it was Skid Row.
Yeah.
And then after a live show, Kurt came up with a new name called Pen Cap Chew. And then Ted Ed Fred, then Bliss, and then finally Nirvana when they were actually
right.
They finally settled on Nirvana.
I can get it from Bliss, that transition.
Yeah, I can get that jump, but I'm Pen Cap Chew to Nirvana.
I know. But look at you've watched Parks and Rec, haven't you?
No.
Oh, so Andy Dwyer's band goes through multiple name changes every week, right? They were Scarecrow Boat and Mouse Rat and Rat Mouse and Three Skin, and they had there's actually a whole long list. There's a whole part of it where Chris Pratt's character is just talking about all the names that they've had as a band.
I have never seen The Office, and I've never seen Parks and Rec.
Oh. I'm sorry for you. Parks and Rec was hands down.
I tried. I sat down and tried to get into them because everybody was like, "Oh, you'll love it." I couldn't do it. I could not do it.
So, did you start trying to watch The Office? Is that why?
I tried doing one and then the other and then the other, and then I've given both of them multiple chances, and I can't do it. It's kind of like Game of Thrones. I can't do it. I thought Game of Thrones was completely overrated and just absolutely just not. No.
So we're getting off topic. I can talk about those things all day long. But each of those things takes at least, let's see, I'd say Office takes about a season to get into. The first season, Steve Carell's character is super hard to watch. Parks and Rec, about 3 to 4 episodes. Game of Thrones, it took a solid 3 episodes. I kept falling asleep trying to watch the first episode. I don't know how many times. Finally, I forced myself to sit down and watch it because all of my friends were into it, and I had nothing to talk to them about. And then I was hooked after about episode 3. I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. I seriously binge watched eight seasons or six seasons in a month.
See,
Keeping in mind every episode's like an hour long.
I couldn't do it. I
Eh.
couldn't do it. Like, and
Anyway,
everybody's
okay.
like, oh my God.
So,
but yeah, so they go through like all these different names, and
right.
it's just really interesting, like how many like different names they came up with to do this.
But that's actually really normal, is for people to rotate through different bands and different band names, and sometimes a member leaves, and so then you have to come up with a new name. I mean, there's all these different things. But also, there's one thing that people talk about, how Kurt Cobain hated fame.
Yeah.
But if you talk to anybody who knew him in Aberdeen, when he was starting to play music, he wanted to be famous. He wanted to create this new sound, and
he just didn't do it in the way that most people would think that he should have done it.
No.
So like he didn't go out like what we were discussing. He didn't go out and buy the flashy cars and like the big like multi-million-dollar mansions and the designer clothes and all this stuff. Like he didn't
wanted like the grungier car.
Yeah,
he liked
he didn't do fame the way he should have done fame, is what people looked at.
Low key, you know, like when you consider the neighborhood that he and Courtney had their house in Lake Washington, their neighbor was was one of the founders of Starbucks, and then right across the lake was where Bill Gates was building his new multi-billion-dollar state-of-the-art mansion, right?
Like, it was a very chill. It's a very chill neighborhood.
But take into consideration, he is the lead singer of a grunge rock band. Do you really think those are the neighbors that are going to appreciate them practicing weird hours or at all, period, ever?
No.
And you know, and that to me is what Kurt's hang up was like, these aren't my people. These aren't the people that, you know, first of all, appreciate my craft. Second of all, these aren't people I relate to. Yeah. You know, this isn't who I am. But, you know, when you look at it, if you look at Courtney Love, period, right? She was big and flashy, and, you know, she had a lifestyle that she was accustomed to.
Part she of that wanted the spotlight on her at all times, no matter what.
Right.
Like for example, look at her when she was trying to get Kurt's attention in the days leading up to his death. She planted a story in the headline saying that she had landed herself in the hospital.
Yep.
She was perfectly fine sitting in her hotel room laughing about it.
Right.
She wanted to be the center of attention, and when whoever she was with couldn't give her that center of attention, she lost it. But Kurt
a little known
very much didn't want to be like the flashy type that she wanted him to be.
Around the time that that she started creating music, right? Like, she was all about that girl, you know, I mean, when you consider like Bikini Kill and the Raincoats and those like hardcore girl punk rock bands, like that's what she wanted. It was really before this feminist movement that happened in music, right? And when she started dating Kurt, she was also dating Billy Corgan.
Yeah.
From the Smashing Pumpkins. And when Nirvana got signed and did better, she basically was like, oh, I'm going to date you.
Yeah, she basically went with whoever's more famous and who would ever give her more tabloid time, probably.
Not just necessarily tabloid time, but once they were married, they were very much like the punk rock sweethearts. Like, their faces were on the front of every magazine.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was like they were like you know, you think Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, like that. Like, but
yeah,
in 93, 91, 92, around there. So, you know, it made sense, even though it seems as though most of Kurt Cobain's friends didn't approve of Courtney. And most, you know, they were
in his circle.
I mean, they had mutual friends. There were friends that loved them both.
Yeah.
But when you go back through Courtney's history, she had a history of being a like hardcore partier who would go in and just fuck things up.
Yeah, people were friends with her because of what she could give them.
Most people. I can't say that about everybody.
A lot.
Like,
Okay, so yeah, so most people are friends with her based off of like what she could give them.
what she could give them, or it was just easier to be friends with her than be on the wrong side of her.
Yes.
I mean, that's not the only reason anybody's friends with Courtney. I hear that there are some people that see her more redeeming qualities. Is just being on this side of things. The only thing we see is
Yeah.
this personification that she has put forward, whether or not it's true.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway.
But like one thing, so it's like because like one thing like people kind of associated Kurt with was like, oh, he was like super depressed because of like his music and all this other stuff. And he always talked about dying in his music, and it's like, yeah, there are a lot of references to death in his music. However, oh, he even says in multiple interviews that the reason why there was a lot of references to death in his music was because he had a stomach problem that literally made him want to die.
Yeah, that's
Like,
actually,
if you don't live with a chronic illness every
yeah,
day, especially not one that's not seen every day. I have friends that live with chronic illnesses and stuff, and it like literally just getting up some days, it takes everything in you, and it just kind of makes you want to die.
right.
And his music was the best way to kind of get those feelings out. It wasn't that he actually wanted to die; it was that the pain was so bad and nothing was helping.
Right. So let's discuss that for just a minute because that is actually important. Kurt Cobain was diagnosed with scoliosis as a kid, and he kept going to doctors for this stomach pain. I mean, he went to multiple doctors over multiple years to try and fix this issue, and finally, that's why he turned to opiates slash heroin was
Yep.
because it helped the pain. Turns
And that's
out,
actually a lot of reasons why a lot of people turn to drugs sometimes is because
yeah,
they have
chronic
they have
illness and stuff.
they have
Mhm.
illness issues,
Right.
and
Yeah.
the
It's really
medication
not
that they're
uncommon.
giving them isn't working, so they try to go for something harder.
So couple things to deal with this. So first of all, with heroin, as soon as it hits your blood, it basically becomes morphine,
Yep.
which stops pain.
Yep.
Um, the other side of it though is that the issue was, and I had to dig to find it, but Kurt Cobain's stomach issues were caused from pinched nerves from his scoliosis. That's got to be painful.
Oh yeah.
But he finally got it diagnosed correctly and fixed at the end of 1993. So all of the interviews that he had around January of 94 were saying he was so happy because he finally didn't have the stomach pain anymore. He was able to eat a whole pizza without wanting to,
Barf it back up.
he could actually eat it and enjoy it because he didn't have the stomach pains. So
Yeah.
because of that, a lot of the people that talk about him on tour in Europe, which happened that like February and March, right?
Mhm.
Talk about how it was weird to kind of be hanging out with him because he wasn't doing a lot of the more or less debauchery things like the drugs and stuff
Yeah.
while he was over there because he didn't need it the way he needed it before. Now he still obviously had an addiction because heroin is an exceedingly
Oh yeah.
addictive
But he
substance
wasn't he wasn't doing it to the amount that he had been doing it before.
because he didn't have to because he didn't
Yeah,
have the
because he
pain.
he finally felt okay enough to where he didn't have to take all these high levels just to feel okay.
Right. Right.
And like that was something like
Right.
that was something that a lot of people.
But let's talk real quick about like Katy Perry and oh my god, what's his name? Her ex-husband.
Russell Brand.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Katy Perry and Russell Brand. Like this is part of the reason that they broke up was Russell Brand had to get clean. And Katy Perry kept having parties and friends over where they were not always doing things clean, which it is
I
what
mean,
it
he
is.
also
I'm
cheated
not
on her
judging
too.
anybody for it. I'm just
He
not.
also he
Okay.
also cheated on her too a few times. That's one of the reasons why they
Right.
divorced.
While she was on tour. Yeah. There were some issues there. But this was one of the big issues that Russell Brand had with the relationship was that she had friends coming over and they were like doing drugs and he was like I'm clean and sober. Like and a lot of times and that's a lot of relationships end that way
Yeah.
because like even the movie 28 Days with Sandra Bullock, right?
Mhm.
Like when she starts realizing that she does have this problem and it's not normal to always have to behave this way, but the guy that she's with, like to him, this is how he lives his life and he doesn't see anything
Yeah.
wrong with it. That relationship ends. Like that's, and then that's not really a spoiler per se because the whole movie is about Sandra Bullock's character going to rehab. But
I mean, if you haven't, okay, let's be real. If you haven't seen that movie by now, that's your own damn fault.
yeah, agreed. So, but it's also important to recognize that just because somebody has an addiction doesn't make them a bad person. And it also doesn't mean that you have to treat their death improperly at all, period. And just
Which is
because
what
he
we're
was a
going to be
junkie
getting
doesn't mean he
into.
wanted to kill himself.
Yeah. So, one of the huge theories that were out there is the original cause of death. And that is that Kurt Cobain shot himself in the face, like shot himself in the head with his shotgun.
Right.
Okay. So let's just throw everything out the window and let's just kind of, there's really not a lot of evidence to back up this being a suicide. That's where my thing is coming in. Yes, people could be like, "Oh, what about the suicide attempt in Rome?" Courtney and Kurt both said that that was not a suicide attempt. It
No,
was an
it was an
accidental
accident.
overdose. The doctor had even said it was an accidental overdose.
Right.
Tom Grant even goes back and speaks to the doctor because Courtney, after Kurt died, tried to say there were 60 pills in Kurt's system when he had that overdose. And the doctor tells Tom, no, there was not 60 pills. It was an accident. The Ruhypnol that he had gotten in prescription for the pain that he was feeling was mixed with champagne champagne. I think it was alcohol. Basically, it was mixed with alcohol,
So
and
let's
he overdosed essentially because it wasn't supposed to be. Now over in Europe, you can actually get Ruhypnol over the counter,
copy their system.
prescribed to you for pain medication because that's what it does. If used in correct doses, it manages pain. Here, it's used as a date rape drug, unfortunately, but in
It's
correct doses,
also
it's
a
there.
tranquilizer, so it'll help you sleep. So
Exactly.
let's step back for just a second. Let's talk a little bit about this because with Kurt Cobain, right? There was this all this stuff that came out in the press. There was a bunch of things that happened once. It was like, okay, Kurt Cobain killed himself. Let's just run with this for just a minute and
All that
talk
was put
about
out
the
there by
things
Courtney too.
leading up to it. Okay, I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying, okay, let's assume Kurt Cobain killed himself. Here's the things that show it's possible, the things that were in the press, the things that were out there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, he had tried to get out of his European leg of the tour. Okay. There was this report from Courtney. These were interviews Courtney had. So it's not saying one way or the other. There were things his wife flat out said he tried to kill himself in Rome. He left a note for me then. And then there's a suicide note now, right?
Yep.
He was
But the
found.
note, surprisingly, from Rome vanished because supposedly a detective told her to get rid of it because it would have looked bad on them.
Yeah, because it basically said he wanted to leave her.
Yeah.
Then he's found in his home after leaving rehab with a gun, a shotgun on his body, and he's got it in his hand, right? And he had there was a box of paraphernalia next to him, and in his system they found Valium and exceedingly high doses of
Heroin.
Of heroin.
It was black tar heroin, essentially.
It was pure. It was 100% pure heroin. Now, with this, that already to some people says he tried to kill himself. He tried to overdose himself on heroin. Okay. The thing is, and also there was this report that he was found locked in this greenhouse on the upstairs section of his garage.
It wasn't locked. I mean, it was locked, but it was a push lock.
Right. So here's the other thing, though. There's two doors.
Yeah. So in the report, it says initially that there was a chair in front of the door, in front of the French doors. But then it showed that the other door was a push lock that was locked. But then at the bottom of it, it said that the French doors were barricaded by a stool. So which technically they were barricaded by a stool. It just wasn't the entrance doors that had a stool in front of it.
Two sets of French doors. One set was not really doors that were commonly used.
Yeah.
So it had stuff in front of it, including a stool.
Yeah.
The other door was locked and they had to break the window to get in there, but it was a push lock.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
which means somebody could have pushed it.
This is us trying to be in the mindset of he killed himself, right?
which is
Okay, so he
so
had depressing lyrics. He tried to kill himself in Rome. There was a stool in front of the door, which means he barricaded the room, and he shot
Courtney
himself
goes
so
on to
high
all
of
these
heroin
interviews.
that
Courtney goes
he
on to all these interviews and says, "Oh, this is like he killed himself. So why would we have any reason to not trust her?"
right. Not just that, but he was found with a gun in his hand,
Yeah,
which tells us that he tried to kill himself. It was obviously a suicide.
yeah,
Okay. Now that's so those are the things that when people say, "Oh, he killed himself," those are the things that they're looking at.
yeah.
Okay. Like, I think we need to make this abundantly clear that these are the reasons people honestly believe that he killed himself. He had a lot of talk about killing himself in his music.
Mm-hmm.
He had tried to commit suicide in Rome. He had left a suicide note more than once.
Well, and a lot of people, I feel, didn't really want to look deeper because,
Well, because here's the other thing, though, is first of all, he was considered a junkie.
yeah,
So people tend to, I'm sorry, not take those cases very seriously.
yes, he was famous, but he was a junkie. Like,
Right.
unfortunately, that it came down to it. He was a heroin addict, and
Yeah,
so
he
it
was.
was
And
either
he was
oh
found with a
he
humongous amount. And I
oh it was
say
either he
humongous
overdosed.
because it was massive. Okay. Which also says that he would have had to have shot himself with the heroin before he shot himself because it was in his bloodstream. Your bloodstream stops moving when you die. So therefore, he couldn't have been shot with that heroin after he died. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you hear people say, no, no, he killed himself, these are the reasons they're giving.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's look at this a little closer, though, and explain
So
why.
before we get into before we get into that theory that
Right.
I know we're about to go into, one of like the lesser known theories. This is something that I just found floating out there, and I just thought it was not funny, but I thought it was kind of like interesting. Like there are a few fans out there who think like he was killed by a psycho fan. Like you have those famous you have those famous artists and stuff and those famous singers who were killed by psycho fans
Oh, yeah.
and stuff, and just in some of the most heinous
You
ways and
got
everything.
John Lennon.
Yep,
You've
John
got
Lennon.
Selena.
Yep.
I mean, well, the Selena thing was kind of a weird, that's a
Well,
whole.
Selena. I mean, she wasn't a psycho fan. I mean, she was a psycho fan, but like it was a
She
completely
was
different thing.
stealing from Selena. That's a
Yeah,
whole
but
other.
you got John Lennon, you got Selena, you got oh god, there was somebody that was recent, like a few years ago, who I actually listened to and stuff. She was on The Voice and everything, and she was
Oh,
doing
yeah.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
so like you got her, like you got all these people. So some people actually thought like that's kind of like a little theory there that kind of like floated around and everything.
Well,
Like
especially
maybe
when you consider that they had just had a break in.
yeah, like maybe he was killed by a psycho fan. Like maybe whoever did that came back and tried to, and like
Right.
Kurt didn't show like the affection that they wanted, and so they killed him and they made it look like a suicide because who's going to look deeper into it because he was already
Right.
talking about suicide, so why not?
Right.
So that's just kind of like a little theory that like I saw that I figured that we can mention in here. But so the big theory that everybody I know that's the reason why everybody's listening is like, did Kurt Cobain actually kill himself or was he murdered?
Right.
Now, I'm gonna say kind of some of my things, and then Amber's gonna say like her things because we both have different sides to this that we have investigated, that we have seen, that we have done, and everything.
Right.
So my huge thing is Kurt was found, like he's found on April 5th. Okay, so he's found on April 5th. It was said that he died on or around the 3rd.
Yep.
So when Courtney hires Tom, okay, Kurt is already dead. He is already dead at this house. He is already up in the greenhouse. He's already been shot to death. For one, if somebody was staying at the house, which Callie was supposed to be staying there, one, I know damn well you would have heard a gunshot from a shotgun. A handgun, maybe you could have excused it, but a shotgun, if you've ever shot a shotgun before, those things are loud.
Yep.
Those things are loud. So you would have at least heard it and been like, I think we should go investigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Two, there was when Tom Grant and Kurt and Courtney's friend, Dylan, I say Kurt and Courtney's friend because he technically was both their friends,
He was
go
he
to
was
the,
Kurt's best man at his wedding.
yeah, so so go to the house to go to the Lake Washington house, finally, because Courtney is like, yeah, go ahead and go and everything. They find this note that's placed on the stairs from Callie to Kurt, basically saying, how could you be staying in this house and not tell me? You need to call your wife. You need to stop being such a fucking asshole. Like, how dare you worry her? But it's placed, like, in a place where it looks very staged. Like, it doesn't look like, it's not placed in Kurt's room. It's not placed on the kitchen table. It's literally placed right there on the stairs where you would see it.
Right.
Okay. And then on top of the fact that Tom wanted to have somebody out at that Lake Washington house that day. Like, the day Courtney called, he wanted to have somebody out at the Lake Washington house that day. Courtney was like, no, Callie's staying there. He'll tell me if Kurt shows up. But in the same breath, she goes, I don't trust him because he's a manipulative liar. But again, in the same breath, she goes, but he'll call me if Kurt shows up there.
Right.
So you're telling me that you don't trust this guy. You trust him with your kid.
Right.
You don't trust this guy. But then you're telling me that that you trust this guy to, like, tell you that your husband's going to show. So we got that. We got Dylan taking a call from Courtney, and Rosemary, Courtney and Kurt's lawyer, hearing Courtney tell Dylan to check the greenhouse, but Dylan not telling. Hi, Phoebe. She said it's time for love, Mom. But okay.
Hold on.
So Rosemary, hearing, because Rosemary told Tom, like, yeah, I heard Courtney call Dylan and say check the greenhouse that day. But Dylan didn't want to check the greenhouse. Is it because Dylan knew it was there? Or is it because, and then Tom, when he gets the call that there was a dead body found in this greenhouse, he's thinking it's like this tiny, like, little, like, ramshackle greenhouse. He didn't think it was like this huge thing that you can't miss unless it's rainy and dark and you don't know what to look for.
Well, and there were floodlights in his face.
Yes, exactly. And I'm sitting here going, it's just all this stuff that's not adding up. On top of the fact that Courtney filed the missing persons report in Kurt's mother's name. Mm-hmm. Courtney then goes on after Kurt dies to say, oh, yes, this was a suicide attempt in Rome, even though his medical records say different. Right. Courtney basically having, like, having an alibi by getting herself arrested. She had a note that said, get arrested in her backpack.
Yep.
We'll talk about the other stuff. I'll have you talk about the other stuff that's in there. We have the suicide note that clearly looks like it was written by 3 different people. And the body honestly looks like it's just kind of like a thing that Kurt was writing just because he was writing. Right. The only thing that looks like a suicide note is that last part where it's like, Francis's life will be a lot better off without me. Courtney, keep going for our daughter. I love you. Like, that's really the only part that sounds
I'll meet you at your altars. Yeah, it's...
Yeah, so that sounds like a suicide note. And I'm sitting here and there's all this stuff. And it's even more so when Tom found out that Kurt died. They went to the crime scene. And, like, he tells them, he's like, look, I have, like, information about this that I think you guys should hear. And instead of, like, detaining him right there and interviewing him right there, they go, come back to the station around 3 p.m. We'll talk to you then. And so he sits down with the detective who's in charge, and he sits down with the detective who's in charge, who's Donald Cameron, and he's a sergeant. And he's basically telling him, like, you know, this is what's going on. And he's like, look, I've been back to that crime scene. Like, I've gone over it and everything. And Sergeant Cameron's like, well, he was barricaded in, so it was obviously a suicide attempt. He was like, no, it wasn't. It was a push lock that you could have easily, like, locked going out of the room. He's like, the barricade was on the other side of the room. Well, he had the gun in his hand. Okay, so why does that explain why the shotgun shell is on the left side of his body instead of the right side of his body where it was supposed to be? Oh, well, this, and this. Right. Okay, so why does he have this lethal amount of heroin in it? Like, the entire time, Sergeant Cameron is just, like, super, like, hostile towards Tom. Just super hostile. And finally, like, he's like, well, you're not giving me anything that would think. And finally, Tom is like, look, can I just see, like, the photographs from the crime scene? And Sergeant Cameron's like, no. We're not getting those developed right now. Right. And it's like, why not? Because, like, even the paramedic was like, I have seen shotgun blast to the face. And usually you have to have fingerprints or dental to identify them. His blast was very clean. You can tell it was him. His ID, we couldn't tell it was him. Like it didn't register, but until we saw his ID and we were like, wait a minute, are you
Right.
kidding me? And the ID wasn't out like normal. Like the ID was just out. No, we had to open up his wallet and get his ID out and
Yeah.
everything, and then we had it set down and stuff. And so, like, what's funny, and I find this funny, is Detective Cameron actually resigns a few months after Kurt's suicide because he was actually caught trying to replant evidence that had been stolen in a different homicide scene.
So that was there was actually a few things, and 2
But that
years
was one of the
later
main
he
ones that
was
he had.
under huge scrutiny because of theft.
Mm-hmm.
And then had the opportunity to resign rather than be dragged
Go to trial.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's just all this stuff. Like, I understand that the Seattle Police Department went in thinking it's a suicide. He's a junkie. He overdosed or he killed himself. All this other stuff. But the thing is if you have the first officer on scene saying it did not look like a suicide, if you have the paramedics on scene saying it did not look like suicide, if you have a few other people saying it did not, if you have his own lawyer saying it does not look like a suicide, then
But I'm
we
gonna
have talked about this so
imagine
much. We
it
have
wasn't
talked
a
about
suicide.
this so
Yeah.
much with how you handle a case and
Right.
stuff. When you go
Yeah.
in, you don't have precognitions of anything. You don't
Right.
have nothing. Even if you walk in, it definitely looks like a suicide. This dude is hanging from a bar. He did it himself. It definitely looks like a suicide. You don't do jack shit until everything has been examined. Every little piece of evidence has been examined. Fingerprints are sent out and come back. Everything. There were fingerprints on that gun that could not be used because they were too degraded by the time they got that.
Yeah.
Like,
so let's I do want to talk a little bit about a couple things. Now, first of all, there's a quote out there, and I off the top of my head couldn't tell you who said it, but it was, if anybody wants to get away with murder, the best way to do it is to kill a junkie.
yeah.
And this is something that we have talked about at great length in many of our cases about how there are so often people that live these, less than conventional lifestyles, whether it be a rock star or a prostitute or a drug addict. It doesn't matter. Literally doesn't matter, because they are still people. And if they died, their case matters.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so we've talked about this at length. And this is another one of those instances where basically they walked in going, another, rock star junkie. He just, couldn't handle it. Just killed himself. Suicide. Psh. Like, they had already decided at the scene that it was a suicide.
Yeah. And like,
is not okay. Okay.
If you listen to us at all, you know that we don't stand for that. So, disclaimer, if you're listening to us and think that we do, you got the wrong podcast. We treat everybody equal. It doesn't matter if you're the Pope or homeless.
So here, I just want to talk about the things that are suspicious in this death period. I'm not, honestly, I have my opinions. My opinion is that Courtney hired somebody to do this. And the reason I feel that way is because there are lots of reports of her threatening other people to have them beat up or killed by somebody that she hired.
Yeah.
Okay. There's actual records of her making these statements to people throughout her life.
Well, and then let's also not forget the fact that they were in the middle of a separation. Like, if
they were at the beginning of a separation. That was what the note in Rome said, was that that was the note in Rome saying
he wanted to leave her.
He called the lawyer to start having her removed from his will. And she called the same lawyer and said she wanted the nastiest, meanest divorce lawyer that their lawyer knew of.
Because she wanted to get custody, because she knew that the only thing Kurt cared about anymore besides his music was his daughter.
Right. He turned down a $10 million opening Lollapalooza, headlining Lollapalooza gig.
Yeah, he loved that little girl. He wanted, and everything was going to go to Francis.
So here's what most people, again, door was not barricaded.
Nope.
Okay. Also, the amount of heroin that was in his system was 3 times the amount that a high tolerance junkie would give themselves.
Okay, so like I've said, I've mentioned this in many podcasts. My mother was a heroin addict. She did heroin, she did cocaine, she did a lot of stuff. And I remember one time her and I were actually talking about this case.
Yep.
Because that was actually who I learned that he had heroin in his system from. Is
Yep.
because my mom, obviously, she followed the case very well and stuff. She looked at me, and my mom was 51 years old when she died. She had been doing drugs since she was like 12. Okay, so she was a pro, if you could be a drug addict pro. Like, she was a pro. And she straight up looked at me and she said, Alex, the most I have ever had of heroin in my system, or anybody else I know that have been able to function, has been maybe one time over the lethal dose. She's like, maybe, if that. She's like, and you have to have a very high tolerance for that.
Right.
She said for the amount of heroin in his system, especially because it turns to morphine, which I don't know. You've had morphine. I've had morphine.
I've never had morphine.
Well, okay,
I
so
was
I've had
prescribed
morphine
it
in the
once and I
hospital.
refused to fill it.
So I had morphine in the hospital, and it was when I was in the hospital in Colorado when they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, and they gave me morphine as pain medication. You literally feel like you are having an out-of-body experience. I wanted to move my hands, but I couldn't move my hands. And that's someone who has never touched anything stronger than pot in her life. That's somebody who had the dose that the hospital would recommend to you. Yeah. That's somebody who, like, I literally felt like I was looking at my body from above me and stuff. And so my mom basically told me, she was like, for him to have that much in his system, it's not possible. It's not possible.
What's not okay, so here's the problem with opiates, though, is that the lethal
it's possible
dosage,
to have it in a system, but it's not possible to, like, do shit.
Well, hold on. So first of all, what you need to understand about opiates is that the lethal dose gets higher as your tolerance gets higher.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Let's just start there. Now, no matter how high your tolerance is, his amount was so high that I don't understand. And this is the thing, is that when it hits your bloodstream, it immediately hits your brain, basically. Okay? Which immediately puts you in a state of, like, I don't know if you've ever seen, there are videos out there and documentaries of people who, they're talking about these drug addictions, and these people essentially shoot themselves up and then, like, zone / pass out. Okay? So how did he then, with a Valium and that much heroin in his system, take off? Like, if in reality, if it was me, if I had shot that much up and then I grabbed the gun, I would not have removed the
No, you wouldn't have been able to put your paraphernalia away.
No.
You wouldn't have been able to roll your sleeves down. You wouldn't have been able to get into the position. You wouldn't have been able to do anything, let alone handle the gun.
Right. All of those things right there. Because he not only then put it away neatly in the box, might I add.
Yeah, if you look at the only crime scene photos that have ever been released to the public, it's very neat and put away. Yeah. And even the thing used to, like, wrap around his arm,
the tube,
coiled, just perfectly. And I'm sitting here like, it doesn't even look like he used it.
Right.
And on top of the fact, like, they tried,
and then
like,
rolled his sleeve down and and then grabbed the gun and shot himself. No.
Yeah. And, like, another documentary that was put out shortly after his death actually tried to dispel that whole thing. Tried to dispel Tom saying this, because Tom had found out about this and, like, actually put this out. And so, like, they were like, oh no, he definitely could have done it. See, we have a guy here that's high on drugs right now with the same amount in his system, and he's able to function properly. But
he was able to stand on one leg.
Methadone.
Picture.
It was methadone, for one. Methadone is used to treat heroin addiction. Yep. 2, it was taken by pill, which means it didn't hit his system right away.
Yeah, 3, it takes at least 45 minutes for it to hit your system the same way.
3, it wasn't injected. And again, it's methadone.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the same effect.
No.
So, like, that obviously was just like, well, okay, whatever. But
so when you look at, the timeline in itself is interesting. Okay. So Courtney was in her own detox outside of a center in her hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But she was still doing drugs in that hotel room. She was doing drugs while having her first interview with Tom.
So a lot of the information that we've gotten actually has to do with this particular private investigator. And
Yeah.
the reason his information is so important is because
Taped
recorded
everything.
he recorded just about every conversation he had from the start of Courtney hiring him, which happened on Easter Sunday, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, which is weird. I'm sorry, but anybody who tries to hire a PI on a holiday like Easter, why would they even assume anybody's in the office?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so she hired him on Easter, and he has all of these conversations recorded, and he hasn't released a lot of them. Now, there's even some that he didn't release at all, even with the documentary Soaked in Bleach.
Mm-hmm.
He also let a lot of his tapes be listened to by the authors of Love and Death.
Yep.
Okay. So most of their findings are from the conversations that he had recorded, but there are some that he refuses to release until the case is reopened. Now,
Yeah, because he knows that if it comes out, it could
yeah,
be twisted
yeah,
or something could happen to him.
right. He won't let any of that stuff
As
comes
long
out.
as there's that thing of those tapes being out there, nothing's going to happen to him because if it does, guess who's going to be looked at?
Right. Right. So now they did finally develop the photos
Mm-hmm.
20 years later.
Unfortunately, so another reporter tried to actually get those photos because not because he wanted to publish them, but because he wanted to have a forensic team look at them.
Yep.
And he even specifically stated that he's like, I don't want to make these public. I want to have a forensic team look at these because
Yep.
what's the harm in doing that? And
Then the police officer would be
Francis actually went to court against him to have the photo sealed away, which I completely understand because I don't know how I would feel if I were her
yeah,
and photos of my dead father's suicide
right,
scene came
right.
out in public because it wouldn't just be a few photos, it would be everything.
But also,
And
I imagine in her shoes that you hit a point where you're like, we gotta stop beating this dead horse.
well, and I know that she doesn't think her mom did anything. I know that she thinks her dad actually committed suicide. And I feel, and I know that people probably come after me for this, but I feel like the reason why she feels that isn't because that's her own thinking. I feel like it's because she was 18 months old when her dad died. She grew up listening to all the news reports. She grew up listening to her mother tell her. She grew up listening to everybody around her mother tell her.
Mm-hmm.
She grew up basically being immersed in this thing of, yes, your father committed suicide. Yes, he loved you. Yes, he never wanted to leave you, but he committed suicide. And I feel like if it was me in that, I wouldn't want to dig any deeper because
No.
why would you want to find that out? Like, why would you want to find out that everything around you is a lie? Why would you want to find out that your mother had been lying to you your whole life? Like, I get where she's coming from. I do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you have people who are on the outside of it who are like, look, like, we just want to make sure, because release the photos, not to the public. Release the photos to Tom. Release the ME report to Tom. Release the autopsy report to Tom. Let him and forensics look over the photos. If it was a suicide, then it'll come back as a suicide. Nobody even has to know that they have the photos. Nobody even has to know that they're looking at the photos. If nothing comes from it, nobody's going to know. And then Tom come out and be like, hey, I looked at everything. We went over everything. We fine-combed toothed everything. It's not a suicide. But at this point, I feel like Seattle Police Department doesn't want to do it, mainly because, one, Francis has an order on it to where nobody can look at those photos. But if they want to open up that case again, they can.
Yeah.
They can go around that order and open up the case. But I think at this point, they don't want to because you know how bad that would look if it came back that, yeah, they let this person's killer roam free for 27 years. Because they automatically jumped to suicide and they automatically listened to Courtney when she said, oh, yeah, no, it's totally suicide. Like, that's going to look bad for them. Like, even a lot of people were like, look, if this gets reopened, SPD does not need to reopen it.
So with this, if you really want more information, obviously on our website, truecrimeandchill.com, we'll have our sources cited, right? Which we always do.
Yes.
But also, if you want more of some of the stuff we're talking about, we recommend watching the documentary Soaked in Bleach.
Yes.
And also, there was more I learned from reading the book. Let me get it. Love and Death, The Murder of Kurt Cobain by Max Wallace and Ian Halperin.
And we will have a link to the Amazon page to buy that book as well.
Yep.
But I mean, at the end of the day, we will never actually fully know what happened to that greenhouse above the garage.
Nope.
We will never fully know what was in the photographs. Nope. We will never fully know everything about the case besides what the police have told us and what Courtney had put out in the media afterwards.
Yep.
But the thing we do know is that Kurt Cobain basically inspired an entire generation and put Seattle on the map for grunge music.
Yeah.
If any of you ever go watch Soaked in Bleach, it ended with a saying from Kurt that actually kind of really hits with this. It says, "One more special message to go, then I'm done, then I can go home."
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Chill. For more information, including case notes, photos, and sources, visit our website at truecrimeandchill.com. You can also stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Look for new episodes from us each week on Tuesday.